So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another space. This one is going to be extremely meaty, and I hope to hurl a lot less insanities and profanities on the space, simply because that I will not have much time to do. And also because, well, after, as we said, the Ukrainians did their usual thing. We reverted back to the same old grind. The difference is that the same old grind is basically going back to the plan that was laid out in uh, end of 2024 and for which we are now seemingly seeing some results. Um, I made a small thread over the options that the Russians have since more or less the early May to mid-May, and we are almost there. So, first of all, I would like to start with a purely tactical and operational realization from bigger pushers. And I would like to illustrate that through screen cap, screenshot, whatever you want to call it. And that screenshot is from Ukraine control map. So the persons behind the biggest coup the last 2 years. And you can read it. It's very simple. Suddenly, Ukraine control map is realizing that actually light assaults, given their atomized nature and their speed and their lack of actual bottlenecks compared to mechanized or motorized assault, which means with armored means. Simply go back to what I explained around 2024 initially, and then in April 2025, and also in a couple of other posts. Basically, the Russians are reverting to light means for three main points. The first of all, as I said, is that the attacks can be sustained in a way easier way with light vehicles, motorbikes, whatever you want, simply because they are far more available than armored means. And as I said, you can interpret this as Russia's lacking armor, but as I explained, or at least try to give an explanation around the month of April 2025, it has a lot less to do with not having enough armor than just the tempo of the replenishment. That is just not the same. And I explained this. If you're gonna lose 10 tanks, you're still gonna have to transport them via special echelon, make a fit, refit, and then give them to the company that is supposed to use them. Instead of that, instead of using those 10 tanks, you grab 10 pickups, put 5 to 8 guys in them, and of course you're gonna go full technical war. Once you are in your techie war, as I said, the enemy now has a huge problem. It's true that the vehicle, as I said, is a lot less durable and is a lot less protected. But it also means that you can, for instance, we saw that with a very funny video on the Ukrainian side, due to, well, lack of actual, I'd say, trap armor, let's call it like this, you can just jump outside and maybe avoid the fate of a guy traveling in APC. On the other side, as I said, the attrition when it comes to lighter vehicles is going to be higher. So you are not playing it a bit as a 50-50 like with a heavy armor, although as it has been told before you guys, stuff like MRAPs or IMVs may protect you on the first hit, but once the vehicle is stopped, you become a foot mobile. That means that you become absolutely vulnerable to almost everything in the battlefield. So for the Russians, the first step is just the potential with lighter armor, with bikes and so forth, to sustain the tempo, given that they have the infantry to do that. So basically, it's easier for them to line up 200-300 guys with 100 lighter vehicles than line them up with 20 APCs, lose them from the beginning of the assault, wait for another 20, and suffer the casualties that you have there. With the ongoing tempo, the first wave might get lost, the second's going to pass through. And we're seeing this. It's working. Therefore, even the Ukrainians are adapting that technique in a certain way, especially around Tetkino, but also in other places. Scala was very happily showing that they're doing so well with the motorbikes. Uh, the issue, though, for both sides of this is that the attrition in personnel, given the lack of uh, actual protection, is going to be high. If you miss uh, your, I'd say, window of infiltration with your bikes and with your buggies and with your pickups, whatever, or if you run over a mine, you are going to die or you are going to suffer. And this is, I'd say, calculated risk, although it should be done in a different way. The problem, once again, is the ecosystem. The threat ecosystem right now in Ukraine doesn't allow any more huge pileups of material. The Russians did that in Avdiivka. It was the build-up for what followed, which was a tremendous push of over 50 kilometers up to Pokrovsk. But the issue is just the same. At some point, you are going to run out of vehicles at disposal. It doesn't matter that you're going to have 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more in refurbishment or in stores, whatever. The moment you lose it there, it's going to take you at least 10 to 15 days to have those things. Meanwhile, what are you going to do? Are you going to stop the assault? No. What you're going to do is that once you don't have those assets, you're going to start sending them on foot. And this is what Wagner did for 10 months around Bahmut, with the results that we all know. Now, is that a meat assault? Not at all. It's just trying to, continue the thrust on the general line of attack. And at some point, as I said, there is another thing that the Russians are calculating. Given they can sustain the tempo, and given that they have an overwhelming advantage on manpower, but not only, because this is the second part of this space, it's obvious that at some point the Ukrainians are going to yield. And that's what you're seeing right now. I made a small thread to explain to you that the main problem that the Ukrainians had for now about 18 months has never been solved. And the solution would entail the Ukrainians not to go at all. Remember that Zelensky allegedly fixed this by allowing a lot of so-called deserters or absence without order to come back without punishment. And out of the 123,000 cases that were open, only about 21,000 came back. So it's about 17%. You can imagine how bad the things are. But now, thanks to a Ukrainian MP, we learned that this year, in about 5 months, they had about 90,000 deserters, or AWOLs, call it as you wish, but basically people who weren't at their post at the moment they were required to be. So once you start making all these thoughts and all this fuss, you understand that the main casualty count proven, or at least avowed by the Ukrainians, is not even killed in combat or wounded to a degree that you would be unavailable. So basically, not even the recoverables. No, it's literally guys who leave their position and get the fuck out. if you want an illustration, the guy who stabbed people in Amsterdam was a deserter. And he apparently said that his point was to get into a jail either in Norway or in a Nordic country. Okay, he chose Holland, so I wish him good luck with the Turks, the Moroccans, and a lot of Balkanics. But that's what you're seeing here. Life in prison anywhere in Europe is better than life at the front in Ukraine. And this goes in the same line as the thread I made in January 2025, when I explained the biggest problem for the Ukrainians is that they are lying so badly that they are creating the problems themselves. If 40% as a minimum of your 1 million something troops is bound to become a casualty at some point, we know that's a lot more now. Wounded, killed, maimed, and that those casualties are mainly on the infantry, over 80%. What do you think happens when the guys need to be shown the way to a trench or a frontline position or a zero outpost? Those guys, as I said, are the ones that are going to die. So out of the 40 or 50 or 60% of casualties, once again, this means killed, wounded, missing in action, captured, whatever you want. Out of those, you're going to have 80% of your losses. So the people who are going to be in the infantry, so the guys who are supposed to stop the Russians physically, have a over 50% casualty rate. And of course, not everybody is dead. But as I said, if you are an Ukrainian and you have over 50% chances to croak or cry, the first thing you want to do is not be there. So basically, you desert. And that was what I explained, the very vicious circle in which the Ukrainian armed forces are right now. And this doesn't come from something special, because Russians are also taking casualties. And we at Team War Criminal, we have never hidden this. Quite the contrary. 10-1 on both sides. And in any case, anything outside 3-1 for Ukraine was a disaster. Anything under 2-1 for Ukraine was basically losing the war. And now we discover, as I said, that it's a lot closer to 1-1. And in some areas, like Kursk, for instance, is worse than 1-1. So once you get to that point and you realize that, you don't need to think further than this. When it comes to the ground war, to the constriction war, as I call it, the Ukrainians simply do not have an answer. And not because they cannot kill enough Russians, because I swear to God, they should have enough means. No, the problem is that the 3 years of war that passed through saw an absolute wastage of their combat capability. In 2022, the use of the Ukrainian forces was, I'd say, average. Not bad, not good. It managed to do what they wanted, and as I said, they took the two low-hanging fruits. One was Kharkov, which was basically completely abandoned on the planning by the Russian side, simply because their idea was what they're going to do attacking us in Kharkov. We can always come back. Kharkov was right at the border. So the Russians, with their own hubris, made a mistake. But the reality is that they weren't making a mistake, because they came back in 2024. If they want to pull more Ukrainian troops in one specific direction, they can do it. Look at Sumy right now after Kursk. And this is the main issue. This is the part two I told you. The part two is that for the Russians, they are leading the attrition game. Contrary to what everybody's telling you, oh, 10 Russians are dying for one Ukraine. This doesn't happen when the total numbers are made. But the most important part is that the attrition as a empirical value is going against Ukraine. Ukrainians, quote unquote, I'm sorry to say it like this, I know for us Zigros, it's hurtful, but the Ukrainians are not killing enough Russians to make a difference. It's not that they're not killing enough Russians, or they're killing too few Russians. They're not making a difference with the casualty count that I have right now. And the problem for this is not that they do not have the ammo or they do not have the intelligence, or no. The problem of this is exactly why the Russians now enter nimbler and more dangerous attacks. Because they did the math, and the math is the Ukrainians have a manpower shortage all over the line. They had a great advantage, a great quote-unquote equalizer for about a year and a half, which was their drone line. But since Kursk and since the advent of the optifiber drones, that is done. And it is done for two main reasons. The first reason, as I said, is that unlike radio frequency drones, so the wireless drones, the normal ones, there is no obvious signal emitted by the optifiber drones. Everything goes to the wire. And as I said, this makes it impossible for a lot of Ukrainian positions to actually know there is a drone coming. The only way to know a drone is nearby you is fully passive. So eyeball Mark 1 and earlobe Mark 2. Anything else is going to help you out, but it's going to be visual, so thermal, you're going to see the drone flying through, or night vision, you're going to see the drone actually reflect a different shade, or it's going to be olfactive, which is basically hearing that shit flying towards you. Anything else, you cannot foresee it. Of course, there is another option, which is to have a lower level ISR, which would start looking around at every time to see when the drones are coming from. But this is a way too manpower hour intensive for the Ukrainians to do as it stands right now. Because on top of it, the interceptions of the optifiber drones, due to the fact that they are quote-unquote stealthy, are abysmal. You got less optifiber drone intercepted than basically Iskander strikes. So, of course, I'm exaggerating, but there is the point is that the optifibers, when it comes to the direct confrontation, but also the rear of the Ukrainian forces, are wreaking havoc. And I explained this about 2.5 months ago, because the Russians right now are finally employing a late 20th century technology, early 21st, which was the synthetic aperture radars, mounted most probably on the forepost and the Orion drones, the pregnant Kotels, if you want, that was the joke. And this allows them to start and pick them up. On top of it, and we explained that as well, the Ukrainians, once they start losing Kursk, and they start losing it pretty fast, they try to actually counterbalance it by a shadow counter in Pokrovsk, in Donbass generally. That one failed as well, and we pointed out the string of losses that weren't only explained by Kursk. And finally, we have the situation that we have right now, which is the last 2 months, actually the last 40 days, the Ukrainians have lost probably over 1,000 square kilometers. And I already pointed at the beginning of the year that the new year, year 2025, when it comes to the actual ground taken, excluding Kursk, was going 3 to 5 times faster than the year 2024. And you can go to deep state if you want the lowest common denominator, although, as I pointed out, deep state right now is stalling a lot of advances on the Russian side and only adding them when they cannot deny them. Same thing is, by the way, happening to Oryx, which is now denying straight up actual losses. The latest addition of Ukrainian losses for 3 to 4 days was 17 assets. But you need to understand that only today we saw 5 Ukrainian tanks burning. I'm not going to add other stuff because it would be humiliating. But you just go to the Rubicon compilations and you're going to see these guys are losing 15 to 20 assets every day. And it doesn't matter what you're going to fucking say because the results are on the ground. You have an acceleration in the month of May and you have another acceleration in the month of June. So it's very possible that you're going to have a double peak. In May last year, you had the pressure into the Kharkov Oblast with this penetration of about 100 and 200 square kilometers, which was then stymied because the Russians obviously didn't want to open an actual front in Kharkov, although they started to fight in Volchansk, and now the city is an absolute mess. And then they also started to bait the Ukrainians around Gliboke. And we had the results that we have right now, which is those two Russian enclaves, or exclaves in this case, if we want to call the border the limit of the Russian territorial control. Well, you still have about 214 square kilometers from that May 2024 surprise attack. That hasn't gone away. In reverse, allegedly Syrskyi said in August that they had 1,200 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast. That wasn't true, but who the fuck cares right now? And now we're finding ourselves as Ukrainians, if we were Ukrainians, with over 220 square kilometers in Sumy Oblast under Russian control. And yes, they are trying to get that Kino because unfortunately, I explained this, the problem with Ukrainians is that at some point they just treat everything as a nail because the only thing they have right now is hammers. And the usual tactic that they used all over 2023 and 2024 and even on 2025, which is go get some place, bait the Russians over there, use the drones to cause damage and casualties, is the only thing they know right now. Ukrainian offensive prowess, and I explained this already, is gone. And it isn't gone because these people have become stupid. It's gone simply because to sustain any kind of offensive, as we saw in Kursk, you need a boatload of people. And Kursk was, I'm going to repeat, where the Ukrainian defense died. If we need to believe the fairy tale that in Kursk only 20,000 people were used for the whole op, and now that we know that over 9,000 are missing or dead, and over 6,000 are going to be returned in body bags to Ukrainians, that means, as an illustration, that if we believe the 20,000 packs for Kursk, almost 50% of those forces became fatalities. I do not know if you understand what I'm saying here. I'm saying that if almost 50% are fatalities, then the whole fucking bunch of people were casualties at some point. Someone got a small cut, another guy got an arm less, but generally speaking, Kursk is exactly the problem with attrition that is afflicting Ukraine right now. And now the third point, why we are seeing this success on the Russian side, despite the fact that the Russians do not have heavy equipment, or at least do not use it as much as before, simply because the lack of manpower, and this I explained on the thread of May 2025, end of May 25, 25th of May, something like that. The moment you have created these powerful static defenses, you do not have the men to actually make them powerful and formidable. You just turn them out in a highway for the offensive. Because the Russians are going to get there, they're going to stick with the fucking trenches, and they're just going to return the fire to you. We had this actually initially with the Ukrainian forces in Robotino. Once they got the two major trenches across Robotino and then towards Robotino, then they could develop on the flanks far enough to make believe that somehow they would breach the Russian defensive line, the Surovikin line, whatever you want to call it. This, of course, is for people who are stupid, who do not understand how it worked until then. Here, we have a replay of Ocheretino. And that replay happened in Novopavlivka and in Novolenivka. And then on the push, as I explained, in the month of March, February 2025, that the problem with Ukraine is that during the so-called shadow counter, that was supposed to help them out, stabilize and reduce the front line. The only thing that they did is try and reduce the bridgehead beyond the Solona River. It didn't work. You can go to Cope State and you're going to see that the maximum resource that was used and gained by Drapati was, I think, 17 square kilometers all over the fucking defense line in Pokrovsk, a line that was over 22 kilometers long. So actually, you got less space than your fucking line of defense. You can understand what this means. That means that the logic, which would have been 120 square kilometers, which would have reduced your overall exposure to Pokrovsk, never happened. And why it didn't happen? It didn't happen for one very specific thing. Ukrainians, on top of not having the manpower, misused it. And then the question is, why did they misuse it? I already gave you an explanation. It is because they're stupid. And they have become more retarded since Zaluzhny left. Not because Zaluzhny was a master strategist. Quite the contrary. That idiot just fucking kept bashing his head all over the Zaporozhye front. No. But Zaluzhny was a dark horse to Zelensky. Zaluzhny would give you an idea that was stupid, but because Zelensky was afraid of losing face, he would propose the contrary. So in a certain sense, for as long as Zaluzhny was there, Zelensky would start having these debates and would have someone who would say no to him in a delicate way, of course, but you would feel that problem. And we had this discussion in 2023 when we learned that at some point Zelensky wanted to attack Gorlovka. And probably Zaluzhny told him, with what, motherfucker? Sorry, I cursed. I couldn't keep myself out of it. And once Zaluzhny understood that he couldn't deal with him, that Zelensky had, due to that year 2022, completely lost it. In a certain sense, unfortunately, let's say it as it is, Zelensky made the mistake that Adolf Hitler made during the Second World War. Because of some successes, he thought that he was behind those successes. Reality was that those successes were carried by sufficient Western weapon supplies, overwhelming intelligence reports and a generally apathetic Russian high command, which felt, in my opinion, I'm going to repeat what I said, betrayed that monkey gave the northern Ukraine without actually fighting for it. And I'm going to repeat, Chernigov, by end of March, was completely isolated. Taking that city and making the Ukrainians fight for it would have probably avoided the troubles that happened to the Russians around August and September 2022. However, it would still have been a plaster on a wooden leg because the issues that the Russians had structurally were way worse. It couldn't be fixed by just trying to attract the Ukrainian forces between April and June 2022 on a single front as Chernigov. The Ukrainians managed to clear up the surroundings of Kharkov with the same kind of assets. Of course, once again, 2022 was a shit show. It was a transitional phase for the Russians and also a completely different view on the war. Whatever was the plan in 2022, it was bad and it was badly prepared. So both sides, in a certain sense, share that guilt. However, and this is the bottom line, those Russian mistakes were misunderstood by the Ukrainians, who, especially I think Zelensky, who thought that the Russians were a paper tiger or a papier-mâché bear, whatever you fucking want to call it. But the problem is that strategically, that was the biggest mistake the Ukrainians made, which I explained to everyone that wants to hear it. The moment the Russians felt threatened and went into an attrition war is the moment where the Ukrainians de facto lost it, because nobody got the message. And this is what we heard around end of 2023 and mid 2024, notably by the German retard who was very eager to send German Leopards in Kursk, that they weren't expecting the Russians to actually survive the sanctions, the pressure, and the losses on the battlefield. So, to the Russian hubris in 2022, you had a replica, but one that goes beyond the Potemkin kind of vision that the Russians tried to build in 2022. I'm pretty sure that the guys who sent those 200, 300,000 people to invade the second largest landmass in Europe knew it was going to go awry if anything serious was to happen. And this is exactly why the Russian armed forces categorically rejected getting the fuck out from southern Ukraine, despite the negotiations that apparently would have left Crimea in the statu quo antebellum. And thank God, thank God the Ukrainians took the bait from the Brits and decided to do harakiri, because it would have been a way too big loss for Monkey to explain whatever he wanted to do with the Operation 2022. As I said, the Ukrainians, pressed by the Brits and the Americans, refused the conditions that were pretty tame compared to what is being asked from them right now. And the rest is history. The rest is this absolute shit show of a political thought when it comes to this war, which has blindsided a lot of people. And most of them are pro-crops. Most of them don't understand why the GSU from 2022 isn't able to do anything since then. It's very simple. There is no magic in war. The Ukrainians had a surplus of manpower. That surplus of manpower in the year 2022 was absolutely crushed by the Russian firepower, but it still wasn't possible to actually stop the Ukrainian forces because of a layer of shit on top of whatever they had as manpower. However, as I said, the Ukrainians went for the lowest hanging fruit, probably because the Americans told them, like, do that, because once you take it, then the Russians going to start sweating. Unfortunately, that idea, that thought process, had, as I said, two major reversals. First of all, the Ukrainians, especially Zelensky, got high on his own supply. He thought that because we did Kherson and because we did Kharkov, we're going to do this for everything else. And then he misunderstood the problem. The problem wasn't that what he did was repeatable. It is. It's just not repeatable the way they did it with the forces they had and the type of equipment they used to achieve that. Because that was the first half or the first quarter, whatever you fucking call it. But once the Russians actually went back to what they do best, which is attritional warfare, then for the Ukrainians, whatever they had done the first year in 2022, they needed to reproduce that. So basically, the Ukrainians had to destroy over 8,000 assets of Russian military material every single year since. But that was not possible. First of all, because of course there were less Russian assets, but most importantly, the analysis of those losses, that was easy for everyone to see, and the Russians actually understood why, which was a very large front, very stressed forces, which made itinerant logistics far more complicated than defensive logistics. As I said to you, when you're going to defend each and every village with 20 guys with the equipment that would go for it, you do not need 40, 50 Kamaz trucks. You're going to need 10, 12 pickups. And they're going to bring you enough to sustain yourself, some javelins, some FPVs, all that stuff. And everything else, you can just take your time, mine the roads, because the Russians were fighting like that. They were following roads. They were trying to go as fast as possible, which means a far less preparatory phase before the march, a spot intelligence, huge problems with drones for every single unit, and so forth and so on. But the moment that thing stopped, as I said, the moment the Russians relinquished the initiative from January until roughly March 2023, although Bahmut kept going, and despite everything, despite the fact that Bahmut was not a strategic place, and yada yada yada, the Russian forces started to actually read the plan. And there was not much to read, let's be honest. The whole fucking scenario was actually possible to be written down into a Paris metro ticket. It was literally straightforward. It was, let's cut the Crimean land bridge, let's put enough artillery, especially HIMARS, close enough to the crossings around the Kherson-Crimea overpass. And then we're going to just do what we did to the Russians in Kherson. The issue with that, as I said, is that in Kherson that worked due to the inherent threat of being properly isolated, with the Antonovsky Bridge being blown up, Kakova Dam being blown up, and the railroad bridge being blown up. There is no such thing in Zaporozhye. In Zaporozhye, you can fight like a demon. because to cut your logistics would require, as I said, for the Ukrainians to cross through roughly 85 to 115 kilometers of defenses. And in order to do that, you would have to repeat flawlessly what happened in Kharkov. The problem with Kharkov is, as I said, is that the Russians relied purely on initiative to keep the line open, but on top of it, unlike Kharkov, proper defenses were set up, mines were set up, units that would love to get a payback from the Ukrops were laid out. VDV guys, Marine guys, all these people just wanted to, eat piggers. And that's what happened, despite a inferiority in ISR, theater ISR on the Russian side. They denied it by just having more firepower and being able to actually play on their strength. And that's what I actually pointed out. The helicopters came in handy. Just remember, our dear friends at Oryx did not want to recognize the helicopter shots because that could be everywhere. We don't know where it is, no geolocations, yada, yada, yada. But the Kamovs and the Mimils literally creamed roughly 15 to 20% of the vehicles. If you start with such a handicap, I will not try to talk about the FPVs, Bobber and friends. We will not also talk about the start of the mass usage of the UMPKs. Remember, faulty welds on UMPKs 3 months after, oh my god, this is not fun. 6 months after, we need to find a program to stop the UMPKs. Remember that the program to stop the UMPKs was supposed to start in January 2025 and end the 19th of March 2025. Results of that program are that now, due to the oversimplification of the production of some of the CRPI antennas, which allow the UMPK now to fly through heavy GPS jamming, the UMPKs are striking. They are striking hard and deep. And they are making life impossible for static defenses. So the 3 points are there. The Russians have stopped using heavy armor in the same quantity as before because they do not need it. What they are doing right now is go and clean every trench. Once major plots, due to the type of defense that Ukrainians are forced to use due to the lack of manpower, well, the Russians now, when they blow up 3 crucial plots on the defense, they have an open highway to the next line. And this is how you have the breakthroughs. There is no magic. Russians suddenly didn't become geniuses of warfare. They actually were. But it is simply because the attrition is causing the Ukrainian lines simply to be not sufficiently manned. That's it. And the other problem that we're having with Ukrainians is, and this is the explanation, instead of fixing that issue, which is reducing attrition, and there are some couple of ideas to reduce it. One of them is to pull back and try and reduce the front line. The Ukrainians now are still accepting to get caught in quote-unquote boilers, but it's not because they want to be in the boiler. They simply do not have the manpower to reduce the Russian onslaught to a very specific focal point, like Belogorovka, like back in the day, the northern part of the Avdiivka coke plant. All this shit is not happening anymore. And I said this in 2024. The Ukrainians are very happy they are destroying vehicles and people on 12 different directions, but they're completely missing the point. That's 12 different directions that the Russians have the manpower to attack you. at some point you're going to fail. And it's the reverse of what happens to the Russians when they are on the air defense role. You need to stop every single one of the attacks. They need to pass only once. Well, this is the reverse. You need to stop every single Russian attack. They need to pass only once to start exploiting the rear. So once again, we are dealing with a saturation problem, and this saturation problem is a direct result of a lack of manpower and lack of means to cut the Russians on select areas and funnel them to a quote-unquote kill box. Despite what retards on the pro-Ukraine side have been saying to everyone, one of the biggest problems that Ukrainians have right now with the lack of Russian equipment destroyed is that they're not able to make any more kill boxes. What happens is that the Russian assault is going to go 1, 2, 3. At 3, they would be at the position they need to assault your line. And your drones will not be able to do anything. Look at the pushes the last 3 months. The average push that you notice is over 3 kilometers. And in a certain sense, it has both to do to the fact that, and I explained this phenomenon of garbage ground. The Ukrainians cannot start putting 200, 300 people on a barren land, because if they get routed, they cannot move back. They're going to get bypassed and just cut down or taken prisoners of war. So they're forced to go back and back and back and back. But this doesn't happen because they want to do it. This happens because of what has changed dramatically, as I told you guys, since August 2024. Optifiber is one thing, but it's not the only problem. The problem is that we are going with a distribution process that I already explained to you, which is one side is 20, the other side has 100. The whole point is for both sides to be proportionally equal, not to be nominally equal. For the side who has 20, losing 3 is a catastrophe. For the side who has 100, losing 3 is a problem. Even 4 actually would be a problem. But in the great scheme of things, if each row, both sides keep losing the same, the side with 20, after a period of time, would be at 0. And the side at 100, after a period of time, would be maybe at 60, or 50, or even 40. 40 to 0 is still 40. And in order to delay this, the Ukrainians were using drones, were using ISR, were using every kind of things that you might think possible and probable. The issue with, as I said, the non-manned lines is that they're going to help you for as long as you can keep going. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, there are 3 things that went to play. I told you guys last September that by November, you're going to see a couple of problems for the Ukrainian drone forces. And those problems were not the optifiber usage or whatever on the Russian side. No, they were because the Chinese told them, you little motherfuckers, you gonna learn. And they started a very ostentatory ban on direct imports to Ukraine. What did they ban? Mostly drone parts. So this led to a complete change in the tone of the Ukrainian side. Remember that they said they would make 1 point something million in 2024 and then 4 million in 2025. Now they have revised that from 4 million to 2.5 million. You need to understand, you're dealing with almost 40% less output in the most crucial year. Other issues with the Ukrainian side are the over-gamification and the over narration of this war. Everything needs to be magnified, everything needs to be PR. So, for instance, one of the biggest troubles that Ukrainian drone operators are having, as I've said, is that instead of trying to find a solution for the Pandora box they're open to themselves, one of them is that they started to use FPVs for interceptions of ISR drones, Russian ISR drones. This led to the Russians actually using the same process. But once again, I'm going to repeat, lying on how many drones you have works when those drones are actually untouched. And this is for both sides, by the way. I'm not trying to say that Russians are not lying. No, I'm saying that once you start boasting that you have 1 million drones, for as long as these drones are untouched, as I said, everybody can believe you because, oh my God, still, they have eyes everywhere. But once you start losing them, then you start to see, as I said, a lack of data, a lack of ISR, a lack of intelligence. This didn't happen for the Russians. And I told you, from what we're seeing, they were shooting between 2 and 4 and then 5 to 10 every day. It's not enough because most of those drones are still extremely cheap. And on top of it, the whole process of interception takes out a whole drone op. That's why the Ukrainians slowly started to have dedicated drone teams for this. But that means that suddenly you are doing something that in overall terms is useless. Yes, it's true. For the moment, you're going to deprive the Russians of a view of a specific area. But then the Russians are going to pull another and another and another. So that production issue that you were boasting about, suddenly, instead of using, I don't know, 30,000 FPVs per 6 months to just attack the Russians, you're going to start taking a portion of those, try and attack the ISR drones, or try to attack the Shahids, or whatever. And suddenly you have less. And the Chinese ban enters in force, and then suddenly you were boasting about being self-reliant, all that shit, but then you start telling people, okay, from 4 million you're going to 2.5. There is something there that nobody's taking act of, and it's very funny. No Ukro fluffer, no Ukro pusher is saying, okay, maybe that's a problem. And this is not the only thing. As I explained last time, the Ukrainians are having these extremely retarded ideas of turning war into some kind of game. And I understand why they do that. At some point, the horror of it needs to be drowned into something that is borderline psychopathic, but that can allow your guys to keep going. And that's the whole gamification. And on top of that, you're going to make a reward operation out of it, which means that you're going to give certain points for the targets destroyed, people, equipment, armored fighting vehicles, drones, whatever you want. They're going to have a rank, and then at the end of, 2 weeks or a month, you're going to see who's got the more points, who's got the more proven kills, and those guys are going to start having what? More equipment and more supplies. Enter the issues that Ukrainians had already in long-range fires, which is Ukrainians from the beginning, from the get-go, as was admitted by the headquarters / procurement responsible for Ukrainian army, that dates from June 2026, that a lot of shit had been just destroyed. It was on Oryx, but he said, we just cannot use it, or it's destroyed, it's gone. That meant that the Ukrainians would have to be delivered equipment from the West with the ammo that went with it. And it went fine for a while. And then things started to change, especially the Lotto Bingo 777 started to get yeeted. Then you had the Crabs started to suffer, the IS-90 started to suffer. But of course, the most important losses were on the lighter Soviet era self-propelled howitzers or guns. So the Gvozdicas were getting absolutely creamed. The Akatsias were getting creamed. Sometimes when they had a own Msta S or captured one, it also would get creamed. And then the saga of the Bogdana started, and we know how it's going on. There are these claims over 260 Bogdanas assembled by now, but unfortunately, they do not even make the most losses, which they should, because they should be the most numerous artillery piece in the Ukrainian armed forces. This, of course, makes no sense, because, as I said, it would mean that the Ukrainians managed, while being bombed to shit and having no foundries whatsoever, to assemble and produce more SPGs than established players as France or Germany. This doesn't matter, to be honest, because the reality has dawned upon the Ukrainians right now. But as I said, with the gamification, some units, for instance, the Baba Yagas, who were and still are a plague for the Russians, started to get hunted. On top of the ISR drones, which are suffering now a mirror pain that they inflicted the Russians from September to roughly September 2024 to March 2025. And the problem with that is, as I said, is that once you start losing them, then you start to see how much really you have. And for the Ukrainians right now, when you see the kind of losses they have, despite the domestic product still being the lion's share of the losses, you start to see a lot of foreign shit. And it's very funny, because slowly, even that is showing that the Ukrainians not only are lying over the alleged production or planned production, or whatever you want to call it, but on top of it, are caught in their own lies. You need to see the videos that are coming through for Baba Yagas, for Mavics, for FPVs, for a lot of shit. And there was an article more recently that the guy said that we would have like 10,000 or 1,000, I don't know how much exactly, for a week, and now we have 200 to 300 per month. And you do not want to go and fly and find Russian FPV drone operators, even if you know, because you're going to have one flying back to your ass. But on top of it, you cannot prove that you killed the guys, because most of the time they are on a dugout. So the only thing you can show is that you blow stuff up. But are the guys dead? You cannot prove it. So you're going to waste, as I said last time, precious assets that you have in less quantity for a strike that will not yield nice, gory results. And therefore, you would use what you have in scarce numbers for something that you cannot benefit from as a drone operator, given the whole gamification program. So killing one Russian soldier was like 12, and killing one drone operator was 3 point something. So you can see both the absolute mental design of that system, but most importantly, because this is the worst part, it's not even the mental design, is that it forces sides to actually have major issues down the road. Some groups are gonna. It's the exact same complaint that the Russian side had for initially Sudnidien, then for Bobr, and now for Rubicon. Some groups are gonna have more than others, and those who actually should be doing a job, like, as I said, the Baba Yagas, the anti-drone operator teams and so forth, they're not doing it simply because they do not have them. They don't have the means. And also, there is no reason to do that, because the whole gamification system just brings them less. So it's easier for them to start posting, as I said, gory programs of killing lone retreating Russian soldiers and actually doing a fundamental job of hunting Russian drone operators. But on top of it, as I said, this reeks of the skirmish mentality that is now very entrenched in the Ukrainian armed forces. And what else but the nomination of Magyar at the head of the unmanned group of forces? Because that dude has been failing Ukraine whenever he has been since Kherson. Whenever he has been, Ukrainians have been pulled back and pushed back. He was in Krinky, Krinky failed. He went to stop Pokrovsk, he stopped Dick because now the situation is even worse than before. He went in Kursk, they got raped there. It's a long string of bad jujus and jinxes everywhere he and Zelensky go, Ukrainians die and lose. So the reality of this current war that we're seeing here is not as much as a foregone conclusion that Russia is going to win. Instead, it is, of course, but it's the stacking up of Ukrainian misconceptions, self-delusions, and also the inability of its allies to actually do what they need to be doing. And this, of course, has to do with the nuclear arsenal of the Russian Federation. But it's not only that. It has also to do with the way and the structure the Ukraine's little helpers have right now. And you're seeing it very recently, I think a month ago. It was said that the Germans, since 2019, had lost over 200,000 industry jobs, and in 2024, 100,000 alone. Do you see the pattern there? It's very much like the acceleration of Ukrainian losses. And the common point between both is that they are ill-suited for the kind of war that Ukraine is fighting, both politically, morally, and economically. On the other side, the reverse side of the German medal, we got France. A lot of yapping, a lot of économie de guerre, but then we learned that the French Ministry of Defense is bankrupt, and I had a space over it, and even made a small thread about it, and I discussed with a French retard over it. The French simply have debts, strategic debts, over 14 years. And they need to pay those first and liquidate due to the type of arrangement that the French have had with the Ministry of Defense when it comes to crediting expenses and so forth and so on. And suddenly, the French that are supposed to be the B face of this European Rinascimento, they're nowhere. And they're nowhere not because they cannot do it or whatever. They're nowhere because their planning sucks for the last 14 years. And for the last 14 years, all the Western nations, the Pindos included, didn't understand that the slow but unavoidable deindustrialization due to the logic of profit. Basically, why would you make tires in Germany if it's cost a third of the price in China? You make them in China, transport them for 1% of the cost or 2% of the cost in Europe, and sell them, profit. On top of it, about actually sanitary conditions and shit, the Chinese take care of that. They're a totalitarian state, quote unquote. And yes, that part is true. That allows you to have more I'd say, blue-white collar jobs where the guys are not in their factories for the day, but they are in sales, they are in planning, all that stuff. And suddenly you discover that this is funny, 5 minutes, but when you need the shit that you would need for war, you end up with the current fiasco that the Germans are going to deliver um, maybe 300 to 400 tanks over 20 years. Same for the Swedes and whoever wants CV90s. The current ETA for those is 12 years for 600 pieces. Meanwhile, Ukraine burns 600 pieces roughly in 8 months of IVs and APCs, I mean. So we don't have a misunderstanding here. So your production for 12 years get wasted in Ukraine in two-thirds of a year. Same for interceptors, for Patriots or whatever. It was so bad that literally for specific interceptions, the Americans were starting to use the APKWS-2 to intercept Shaheeds. And soon enough, they understood that even that wasn't actually coherent because it's a market situation. If suddenly instead of producing 10,000, you're going to produce 20,000, you're going to have a raise in price. A lot of people are like, no, it should be the contrary. You should have a lower price because, you are scaling up. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that because the Americans are not manufacturing every component themselves. And the raw materials to use that shit, they are importing them. And this is the beauty of this. The global economy works for everyone for as long as the global economy has little to no barriers. But the moment you have afforded one or the other side a grip, and in the case of China, is a grip on so many more things than just raw materials or output, they literally have the IP to go beyond it. And that's what's happening right now to the Ukrainians. They are using optic fibers, but the problem is that the Russians are using them 10 times more because they've set up the business with the Chinese. While the Ukrainians are still fucking getting duplex from Latvia, which makes their spools about 25 to 30% heavier than the Russian ones. And which affects, of course, the flight characteristics over time. But it doesn't, all this is just bullshit, it's nonsense, because deep down the main issue is that at some point the Ukrainian leadership understood that they were in the shit. They thought they would do another Moses and the Red Sea. The problem is that it's an ocean and God didn't listen. So now they're swimming in an ocean and hoping that someone's going to come and pick them up. And they're not going to drown. I hope that happens. That someone picks them up and also deals in their name for whatever concession they need to make. Because right now, the Ukrainians are doing a very feminine thing, which is not yielding, even if they're completely wrong with that. It doesn't really matter what the reality on the ground is. I don't want to do it because the law says like this. Bitch, this ain't a court of law. This is Zekoslav Rapinski going after Mikola with whatever he might find. And he's also very hungry and horny. So you got very limited choices when it comes to that. Now that the part of those mistakes made by the Ukrainians are obvious, we're going to go to what's going on the ground, literally. What's going on the ground is very simple. The Russians had all the time during the Kursk operation to actually see the Ukraine fortify the lines and prepare options and everything. And they never let them actually do it close by. No defensive line was built within 10 kilometers. So what happens is that the defensive lines that you're going to have now beyond Pokrovsk, for instance, and beyond Konstantinovka are useless as of right now. They are actually worse than useless, because now that you're seeing who is building them and what, you can see exactly what to expect from them, because you can see them from above. And you're like, okay, there is your fortification point, there is your sleeping quarters, and so on and so on and so on. And then a lot of people are inventing nonsense like, oh, let's put sea wire on the anti-armor ditches. I'm like, it's not gonna matter. The problem with putting all that sea wire and stuff is that maybe you're gonna catch one or two guys, but then the UMPK is gonna smash it, and they're gonna have a hole to go straight through it. Or a worst case scenario, just come from the side and push it forward, which would make it unexploitable from the Ukrainian side to come through that ditch and dislodge the Russians. I'm going to repeat, the genius of this situation from the Russian perspective is that they didn't need to do anything. The whole principle that the Ukrainians were yapping about, that they were going to let the Russians tear out and then just push them away from Ukraine, is happening to the Ukrainians themselves. And once again, it's an accumulation of issues: attrition, Ukrainian lies, lack of performative training, lack of qualitative training, lies within the system, simply because a lot of things that are happening to the Ukrainians right now are theoretically not possible. How the Russians, who are like getting wasted 10 times in a row on the same position, finally managed the 11th. We know how. This is because each and every time they attack that fucking position, you lose a guy, they lose 5. But they got 100 and you got 10. So at some point, you're going to have 5v5 on the trench. And then it's a coin toss. And if you lose, the rest of the fucking Russian side is going to push you out. Once again, this problem for Ukraine can be fixed if Ukrainians channel the Russians where they cannot use their numbers, when they cannot attack you from both sides. Bilogorivka was one such situation. They still lost it. Yes, it took numerous Russian killed, wounded, and captured. But at the end, they took it. And this is the problem that the Ukrainian side is not understanding. Your point is, if you're still going to lose it, you better not lose it in such a way that you cannot recapture it. And this is the Sisyphus myth that paradigm that I'm talking to you guys for now over 3 years. Your point as a Ukrainian is to preserve as much manpower as you can that would allow you to revert and return the lost ground. But by staying fixated to the end, you get no one coming out from that trench. So the people who are supposed to take it are going to come from the other side. They're not going to be in majority. They're going to be at best at 1v1. And as I said, 1v1 can go in very different ways. Now, the other problem that we're having with the Ukrainian side is that for some reason, they do not see things coming to them. Things that I'm going to repeat to you guys. Absolute nobodies on fucking Twitter have seen. And I'm sorry, you cannot convince me that everyone in that fucking Oberkommando des Heeres on the bigger Reich cannot see. There is no way. You cannot convince me that they're all so fucking stupid. And that, of course, there is one thing to see stuff, there's another thing to do something about it. But some solutions that should have been tried have never been tried. The Ukrainians in 2022 didn't need to do all this. The Russians were coming at them. They were not enough. They were not prepared for the kind of war that they were going to fight. And when they actually fight and push the Ukrainians back, they did so at a certain cost, sometimes very big, sometimes very small. But the issue was that the main gauge of success of the Russian forces was when they could control the logistic lines. And this, for many reasons, one of them being the absolute trash of a transit system within Ukraine, never happened properly. They actually started to stabilize those lines roughly around May, June 2022. By then, a lot of things were gone awry. First of all, as I said, they had evacuated Kiev, Chernigov, Sumy, whatever. But most importantly, by June, the whole area of defense in Kharkov had been hollowed out. And in Kherson, it didn't matter how much you were defending. They failed, as I said, to go over a technical line which would have made it impossible for the Ukrainians to actually fight this war the way they did in Kherson. Once they failed there, the only thing that was to be done was either triple down or simply get the fuck out. And they had to did, because it allowed them later on to just start dominating the debate again and having an ascendancy on the strategic approach of the war, whereas the Ukrainians were toying with the tactical approach. And once again, for instance, if you want to see how the Ukrainian side is strategically blind, well, it's the spiderweb operation. The spiderweb operation, which was a success for Ukraine, wasn't a success. And we know this. Why? Because the Russians do not need the whole fucking strategic fleet to pound Ukraine. They need the fleet for something else, and I agree with that. But to pound Ukraine, as I told you, 12, 14 jets maximum are enough. Especially the kind of campaign and the kind of missile use that they're making of. So, if you want to have this discussion, if you want to understand how things work for the Ukrainian side, you need to look deeper than Maliuk making funny videos. And when you look at it, is what I keep saying. Ukrainians attack what hurts them. Yet, for some reason, those planes were not hitting anything. Ukrainians were intercepting 95, 99, 100% sometimes. So why all this operation? Was it just a show? Was it just to bring up more interest from the U.S. now that they burnt their adversaries' strategic fleet? No. And I'm going to repeat. They did it because that stuff was making them waste interceptors. And on top of it, they were simply unopposable. You could have destroyed 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 45, 50, 60%, but still the number that passed through with the payload and warhead was just too much. And on top of it, the whole game about how the Russians are stupid, they cannot learn, they cannot advance, that hubris that I explained to you. And the lies that Ukrainians started making up for everything. I mean, even when they had to film the stuff, they said 41 planes, but they showed 22 planes actually attacked. And once you start seeing the results, you have what you have. There is nowhere even near 22. Not discussing the trick over the mothballed A-50 that actually was only one drone and everything. I mean, we are in the same problem that we're going to always be with Ukrops, which is they started this war half real and half bullshit. Ghost of Kiev, um, Vidivik destroyed. We retook Gostomel the next day. Next day, guy goes there, says, "Oh wow, fuck, these are Russian paratroopers." Um, I mean, from the beginning, the Ukrainians had to make up shit that had no sense. The situation was already very bad for the Russians. You don't need to make shit like that because at the end, and on that Tatagemi actually pointed out, is gonna come and bite you back. And the spiderweb op is exactly that. They bragged. They do that for everything. Every day, 50 fucking barrels of artillery destroyed. You know, bro, this is not possible. Of course, it's possible. This is the Ukrainian way. Um, Kursk causes the Donbass to slightly collapse. No, since we're in Kursk, the Russians have not advanced in Donbass. September, October, November, 500, 600, 690 square kilometers lost. Prior to that, about 200. That dude is the fucking president of that country. And he went on live to lie about that. Not only that, but he's lying over stuff that everybody can verify. Okay, maybe, he had a different idea of the whole Kursk op is that by pulling some Russian troops there, the situation in Donbass didn't become even worse than it was. That is a huge and very risky mental gymnastic figure, but I'm willing to actually consider it if it wasn't for what's happening this year. And then suddenly everything is clear. The Ukrainians, whatever they're doing right now, if it's voluntary, if they are preparing another operation, for whatever reason, they are doing it wrong because last year they had ceded very little ground before they started Kursk. But this year they already have conceded half of what they had conceded the last year for the whole year. So within the 3 months or 4 months of Russian acceleration. So what the fuck are you doing now? How are you going to make this work? Because even if the Russians stop having 600, 700, 800 square kilometers per month, but keep going at 200 until the end of the year, they're going to be at 3.6 thousand square kilometers. And if they're well placed, that would mean that you're going to lose 3 cities at once. So what's the point? If you got a counter to make, please do it. And it's true that indeed there are a couple of equipments that still need to come. But those equipments, when you see what was lost end of 2024 and this year, you understand that those are going to be at best replacing what was lost. They're not going to be able to actually reshape a whole armored core or a whole mechanized core. But at the same time, the Ukrainians do not care. The Ukrainian leadership right now is going all in. It's going for broke. And there is no other thing for them to do. I completely agree. The situation has gone so far while not being dramatic or critical yet. It's critical locally, but you do not see the Ukrainian forces being unable to actually pull back into a second or a third line and stall the Russians some more. And this is due to the nature of this war. This war, as I said, is now devolving to piecemeal assaults on both sides and a slow build-up on both sides before a breakout. De facto, what the Ukrainians are losing now in ground is actually pretty bad, given the kind of war that is being fought. And it's true that the Russians are having the same issues. Because as I said, the losses are, in my opinion, we are not far from 1-1. And even if you are 1.2 to 1, the difference for the Ukrainians is 0. Because as I said, they need at least anything above 3 to 1. If you're not able to ensure a 3 to 1 ratio, what the fuck are you doing? And so you have the advances that you have right now, which is a Russian crossing of the Oskil, a threatening of a larger shaping over Kupiansk, a crossing of the Seversky Donetsk Canal around Kudmirovka, and an advance of at least 4 kilometers, and a choking of Toretsk from its defensive left flank, so from the east. And all in all, you got this creeping advance towards Konstantinovka, which is using exactly what we said, which is literally bunny hopping or grass hopping through the plotted defenses that the Ukrainians have made. So what's going to happen next? Well, I'm going to post another picture from our darling Tatagimi, because that guy is just it's literally the duality of Pigger, you know. You just cannot change this guy. It's a sad thing, but it's a real thing. So I just posted it. When this guy goes from actually says like the trend that last year happened, that the Russians are advancing and suddenly they're going to encircle everybody and break through lines and everything. It didn't happen then, it's not going to happen now. And then he follows up with things that aren't going well for Ukraine. You're going to lose Konstantinovka, Kupiansk, and Pokrovsk. And I'm like, bro, and as for things that didn't happen, like people getting encircled and surrounded and stuff, you literally got 6,000 plus figures. Of course, they're going to be exchanged. So how the fuck do you dare speak about these things? This is exactly what I made the thread in January 2025, because this guy is exactly that. This guy is the type of person who's killing piggers right now. And we should all be sad for that. Him, the Sternenkos, the Pritulas, the Zelenskys, the Zbushniks, TCK guys, these people are not in the war, the real one, the one on the ground. These people are still thinking to a magical ending when, you know, Catherine the Great would die and Russia would pull up as it happened. This is not going to happen, not because Putin is not going to die, but simply because what is behind Putin is way worse than him when it comes to what happened to Ukraine. And if you want a example, look at who the fuck went to negotiate with Ukraine. If you hear Medinsky, if you listen to Medinsky, if you even understand how fucking nasty this guy is when it comes to dealing with 404 Ukro-Zambicans, this is what awaits people if Putin croaks. The only solution for the Ukrainian side, as I said, is an intervention or a divine intervention. I don't think the second's going to happen, or at least it's a lot less realistic than the first. Because we cannot hide from that, not in terms of nuclear exchange or whatever, but whatever happens between them, the kind of recession you're going to see coming, the kind of turmoil globally that's going to happen, it's going to scar this continent, and by that I mean Europe, to fucking death. There is not going to be a turnaround from that before at least 20 years. And in 20 years, well, as I said, we would rather start learning one or the other language, Chinese or English. English is easier, as you might understand. But yeah, that's what's at stake for Europe as it stands right now. Everything else is nonsense. Russia doesn't care whatsoever. The whole point of keeping Ukraine is to revert the whole policy that Europe has been sustaining since roughly 2001, 2003. Over 20 years. And putting a stop there and legally, finally breaching the deadlock of the Helsinki Charter will be a return to history. And I know that it sounds awful because part of the current kind of peaceful era is due to the fact that borders are sacred and territory is sacred. But as I said, that's nonsense. Historically, there has never been any sanctity of the borders. Nationalism installed that. Before that, it was just interests. And structurally, if Russia manages to make it stick, it will create a rather large chaos because if Russia can do it, you're going to have Israel playing that game, and then you're going to have the issue with the Balkans. Then you're going to have the Turks actually now enshrining northern Cyprus. Plus, the Caucasus is going to be boiling, and a lot of other things might happen. However, big boys are not afraid of history. Humans are not afraid from what they always had. And the 20th century literally had the same thing. I mean, Poland is a reflection of that. Ukraine is a reflection of that. Russia is a reflection of that. Germany, unfortunately, is a reflection of that. Romania is a reflection of that. So that's it, guys. You don't need to worry about anything. The only thing that you need to worry right now is how far this thing is gonna go. If we are gonna stop in 2026, as it seems to me that it would be the breaking point for the current type of warfare that Ukrainians are waging, or we are going for another 2 years, and then we have a major issue because roughly 2 years is somewhere between 100 and 120,000 dead for both sides. And I think after the war is over, we're gonna learn that what has been found so far is probably half of what is true, and we're gonna end up with 250, 300,000 dead on both sides, which would actually explain why Ukraine is having issues and why the Russians also are having issues. So just keep an eye on, as I said, the current encirclement of Konstantinovka, and keep an eye on the lateral bypass from Pokrovsk towards Dnipropetrovsk. Those are the two main issues for Ukraine right now. Everything else doesn't matter. Losing Kupiansk, despite the fact that it would be a huge blunder, it's not that much of an issue because, well, behind Kupiansk you have also another type of garbage ground for the Ukrainians, so they can afford to lose it or fight over it. The issue, though, as I said, is to stop the Russians from cutting through the Serebranska forest and go as deep as Chandrilove, because then, as I said, you would have simply no way to supply anything to the sister cities, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Zhizhkovka, from Izum. All the rest is bullshit. Don't even listen to anything else. Right now, the real problem for the Ukrainians is that they didn't manage to stop the Russians from establishing and shaping the front the way they wanted. And as I said, the only successful defense that the Ukraine is going to have in both axes is retreat and force the Russians to a major kill box or multiple kill boxes. Anything else, trying to fight it, duke it out in the city and so forth, is just going to prolong the agony of the Ukrainian armed forces. And I mean, I don't care for that. They would make their bed and they would lie on it, but I think it would still be overkill to start fighting 2 or 3 battles with a potential loss for each battle of 15 to 20,000 casualties. I'm saying casualties, not fatalities, so calm your tits. Over 3 to 5 months, losing all of them, or even two, or even one of them, and then ending up with, as I said, a huge shortage of further manpower to try and solidify the front behind those cities you're going to lose. And that's why the Konstantinovka area is so much in trouble, because it's just a valley. So once you get through Konstantinovka and you start to control the lips of the valley around it, Druzhkovka is going to fall. I'm not saying it's going to be a walk in the park. Don't think like that. Just saying that the situation is going to go from bad to worse for Ukraine. Now, as for the rest, just don't care, guys. Like, as we have had this discussion multiple times, the Ukrainians will always try to go for the flashy shot. They will always go for maximum pair damage. They will always go for the neck or the jugular, even though there is no jugular neck to be beaten. The only thing that the Ukrainians might do, that not still doing, because it would backfire spectacularly, I'm not speaking about the civilians. They will start attacking civilians more in concert. But the only thing that you need to start visualizing is an attempt to the Russian leadership itself. So be that Gerasimov, be that Monkey, be that maybe the negotiation team. The problem with Ukrainians, as I said, is that up to a certain point, I thought they could be reasoned with, in a sense that they would accept defeat, even though they would not concede it. But they are doing a show like they are winning it. And everybody's looking at it and saying, why is this happening? Why are these people so happy? And it's a bluff. And the bluff was seen with the kind of operation they committed with the drones. So perfidy, terrorist methods, all that stuff. It doesn't really actually even matter what I'm saying, because for them it's a badge of honor. In a certain sense, for people who fought Timur criminal, for us there are other things that are badges of honor, which shouldn't be, but we don't care. So in that aspect, your main problem as a Ukrainian secret service and part of this clique around them is that to justify your existence, you need to make a big bang. And this is our issue here. The core issue is the kind of warlordism structure that you're having. You got one hand that does one thing, another hand that does something else, the head that is bullshitting everyone, and the butt is forced to cash in checks that both sides have written. As I said, Gur doing bullshit with the strategic weapons of the Russian military, the SBU shooting people left and right that do not have a direct impact on the war itself. If anything, it's worsening everything. And then you got Zelensky yapping bullshit over this and that, and they're not allowed to discuss this and that, and those are not our bodies, and those are Russian. And then you got the actual Ukrainian army getting absolutely groped to death in a trench. And as I said, I'm pretty sure that those Mobiks are going to be going out with a bang and with a smile to Bandera, because, my God, Patina Operatia was perfect. But now it's time to die. Trapp said this schizophrenic war with two wars within the Ukrainian leadership and the Ukrainian army is exactly what needs to be addressed by whoever can steer the Ukrainians towards a modicum of sanity. Because the whole spiderweb bullshit lasted how long? A week. Now we're back to normal. Go to Cope State, check what happened the last 10 days in terms of advances. Rethink about it. Check how many bodies were dropped today in white trash bags. There are going to be more. The problem of the two belligerents right now is that one is obviously, despite everything that has been thrown towards it, pretty sure of the way they need to deal with this. The other side doesn't seem to control the impulses that they have to just fling poo on the walls and see if it sticks. And this is for everything. I'm not just saying for the terrorist attacks or the strategic attacks through perfidy and through mental illness. I'm speaking about the fact that so far everything that has happened has just made things worse for them. And the only way you can let me just have fun, or let us just hurt the other side even if we die. This logic, unfortunately, makes it impossible to try and discuss with them. And Monkey had that for so long. He discussed in 2022, and they say, you know what, fuck you, we're gonna fight. Okay. Then 2023, about the grain fucking deal, no, we're not accepting this, we're gonna fight. No problem. Kind of reducing the strategic attacks or whatever. Yes, okay, we're gonna do it. Fuck you, we do Kursk. They sit since March, then May, and then they're gonna go for June. You do the bullshit with strategy. Like, what is there to? For once, I literally cannot say anything else but what Monkey said. What the fuck do you want to do with these people? And I know people are gonna say, yeah, but there is a war and you're invading them. Yeah, but that's the holy fucking point. You are already in the shit. So why are you not accepting your situation? Basically, my wallet got stolen by a thief. I have no fucking documentation. Some cop stops me. I cannot prove on a first, like at prima facie, I cannot prove that I have documents. I cannot prove anything. I find myself in a fucking cell awaiting deportation or verification of my identity. Whose fault is it? And make up any possible way for the guys who are actually holding me in that motherfucking cell to prove that I'm not undocumented or whatever. This can work with a lot of cases. The point is to deal with what you have right now, not what you think is the right thing or what you think happened or what you think should happen. Right now, Ukraine is in the shit. And I understand that they're in the shit because of a invasion, a Russian offensive that broke through the Ukrainian border. But you're not gonna fucking try to explain to the bear that it's bad to motherfucking eat you. You're gonna try to punch it, or flee, or jump to whatever tree, or go through water, whatever. You're gonna deal with the situation you have at hand, not what you think you should have done or should be done or someone should help you. And this is the problem with Ukraine. There is no accountability for what they do. They are untouchable. They fuck up in Kursk, they destroy 1,000+ vehicles and assets, no problem. It was a success. Like, bitch, please. They do perfidy, doesn't matter, it's fine, it's allowed, it's actually very, very well done because, the Russians are the aggressors. Ukrainians are running the biggest ring of scamming within Europe. The EU knows this. The EU knows it. Europol is sucking dick because it's Ukraine. We're not going to do it. And the only guys who are allowed to do something are within the SBU. And the guys at the SBU, well, they actually are taking cash from these centers. There is no rule of law in Ukraine anymore. And everybody can yap whatever they want. There is none. And thank God for that, because we are going to this Zelensky clique that at some point hopefully with the loss of 3 cities, will be forced to just shut the fuck up and listen. And if they don't, well, I don't think it's going to be good for anyone, but so be it. That was it, guys. Thank you very much for the situation. And that was it. If you want to add anything, if you want to have any kind of discussion, if you want to ask questions for whatever, I would try and answer it to the best of my capabilities. But for the rest, I think that there is not much to be said today. Thank you very much. It's up to you guys. Go on, Buha.
Yeah, the question is, what do you think about the increased activity in Kherson region? All the information about the training for the Dnipro crossing and the possible activization of the Northern Army in the Zapad 2025 period in September.
I really think that they unfortunately are overstretched in the region. What they should be doing, Kherson, generally speaking, is keep the Ukrainians on their toes and recover as much as possible of ground. You may remember why I said that Kherson and Zaporozhye itself have been saved by, first of all, the explosion of the dam in Kakovka, and also with the slow but obvious building of that Ugledar wall that is going now from east to west and shrinking the total maneuver area for the Ukrainians to attempt another push. Crossing the Dnieper as of now, I know that a couple of guys have shown, especially even Andrei, the salty Ukrop, showed BMP-3s fording and crossing over 1.8 meter puddles, let's call it like that. I would really think that right now it's ill-advised to start that thing in the south. Up north, though, I mean, like you in the group, you know what I think about Chernigov and what should be done there, because nothing has been done from the Ukrainians to repair the second bridge that was blown up in 2022. There is a bypass, but it's like literally a pontoon. And I'm not saying that it's going to be a absolutely flawless operation, but it will, especially if you, as I said, you blow the second bridge, it will just isolate the city and it would make the whole situation untenable from a defensive point of view, but also from a political and legitimacy point of view, because suddenly Zelensky that has said he's going to protect this, protect that, he would lose Chernigov without even it being taken. Just they're going to starve there. And they're going to start asking for a green corridor and yada, yada, yada. The Russians are going to give it. And of course, the green corridor is going to be where? Towards the Russian border. And once the city is emptied, you know what's going to happen, because Zelensky admitted himself. If we evacuate people, the city is easier to be taken by the Russians. So yeah, for me right now, Zapo crossing the Dnieper is way too soon, and it would require, in my opinion, to first go at least 15 kilometers to Zaporizhia city, because then they're gonna start panicking, and then you can play that double game of blowing 2 out of the 4 bridges and reducing the flux, because you're going to be just nearby actually a repeat of what happened to the Russians in the other bank of the Kherson. So The crossing of Dnieper, honestly, I don't think they are planning it right of now, as of now. The attempt to approach Zaporozhye as close as possible and replay either a second Nikolaev or a reverse Kherson would be a lot more interesting to me. I'd say. And as for the north, yeah, I've told to so many people, Chernigov being left alone after almost falling is a sacrilege and an insult to all the guys who died to bring the situation to that point. And hopefully can be fixed or at least avenged in a certain sense. I hope it was a proper answer. I want to make a tactical map over the situation. The guys in the group know exactly what I'm talking about. Thank God we have a new method of corroborating a lot of things that we are actually throwing in the wall to stick. And so far, so good. It's very easy, in a certain sense, to understand how things work once you start having a overview of it, so satellite images. And when you start understanding the basics of how the Russians work, that we just didn't have the overview. And thanks to another little bird, we have it now. And so far, we have not been wrong, and neither has been the little bird. So heads up to the guy. Thank you very much, guys, and well, see you next time.